I'd like to talk about a fun subject today. I want to talk about biblical themes in cinema. C.S. Lewis says that joy is the serious business of heaven. So just to kind of develop the theme here, years ago, I was at youth camp. I was a youth minister. And while I was at youth camp, Danny Chambers, who's also actually more known for leading praise and worship, he preached a whole message on the movie Independence Day. That kind of tells you how long ago this was. But he drew parallels on how these aliens attacked key cities like Washington, D.C. and New York and L.A. and all these things. But he made a parallel on how demonic forces, demonic strongholds attack those cities because they have to have greater influence in places. And I just thought it was great. And of course, it was a lot more. He went beat by beat through the whole movie and preached a message on it. And I thought it was wonderful. Well, I'm the kind of person, if you ask me what time it is, I'll tell you how the watch was built. So I want to kind of look at what was going on there and why that resonated so well within me. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he's put eternity into man's heart. Yet so, he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end." So it says that God put eternity in men's hearts. So that means the reformers had an idea called common grace, that even people that don't know God, when they tap in that creative part of themselves, they will happen upon spiritual principles and spiritual laws, and spiritual things will come out of them. And also, we live, Western civilization is built on Christian principles. Even when atheists attack God, they had to use God's standards to attack God, because a lot of things that we take for granted as just good, right things to do never existed before Judaism and Christianity. Helping the poor wasn't a core value in the Roman Empire. So sometimes in art, principles of God come out. Then he goes on to say, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from beginning to end. What that means is you don't have to agree with everybody's conclusion to draw on eternal principles. Now, this is not the same thing as movies, but I'll use ministers, for example. There's one minister that's, died in the wool Calvinist. I'm not a Calvinist, nor a son of a Calvinist. However, this guy, when he talks about biblical manuscripts and how we got the Bible, it's tremendous. And that is his subject. So when he's talking about that, I want to glean from that. Now, that doesn't mean to gain what he teaches on biblical manuscripts, I have to totally sign up for Calvinism. So that's the point I'm making. So that doesn't mean that we agree with everything in movies, that even the ones we're going to talk about. But I want to drill down to these underlying principles in these movies. And I've heard uber holiness ministers say, well, if you reference a secular movie or a secular song, it just grieves the spirit and all is lost. Well, let's look at that. And it's a valid concern. We got to look at it biblically. However, we have fortunately we have biblical records. They didn't have movies, and they didn't have, I guess they had secular music, but not recorded. So let's look at what Paul did and not just wonder about it. 1 Corinthians 15:33, it says, "Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals." Now, if you have a Bible with little footnotes in it and stuff, you will notice that it is a quote, but it doesn't link you back to the Old Testament. This isn't an Old Testament quote. This ain't even a New Testament quote. This quote comes from a secular play called Thais, from a playwright called Menander. But to our point earlier, does that mean Paul, agreed with every conclusion in that play? No, it doesn't. Paul was using something in their culture to communicate truth with them, because he don't have to build a mental framework about that quote. It was already in the zeitgeist. It was in their culture. So he used that thought to communicate truth with him. And this isn't the only example. Hades, translated hell in the King James Bible. Tartarus, which is also just translated hell in the King James Bible. And all these words had a pagan framework to it. But, Paul and the New Testament authors took these things, divested them of all their paganism, and used them to communicate truth to the hearers. 2 Corinthians 10:6 tells us to take every thought, every idea captive. Now, the primary way we look at that is if you have a bad thought, take that thought captive. If you have a thought of sickness, if you have a thought of rejection or thought of sin, take all those thoughts captive and cast them down. And that is absolutely true. But I want to look at another facet of taking every thought or idea captive. Paul saying bad company ruins good morals, he was taking that thought captive. He took a thought from culture, took it captive to Christ. He took that thought captive and used it to communicate truth. Atheists have done this in reverse with science. I watch these amazing nature documentaries, and they talk about all these things that just scream, wow, an intelligent design is behind this, because wow, look at this thing. You don't find a Rolex watch laying on the beach and say, boy, I wonder how that just flew together randomly. But at the very end of that documentary, they'll say, yeah, and evolution did it. So they've taken that thought captive to atheistic evolution. That unguided atheistic evolution did all of this. And it's funny because they even assign godlike qualities to evolution. They say, evolution made a choice back here somewhere. Evolution decided. Well, so evolution has agency now. Evolution has personality. But see, they even to make the deception work, they have to give it godlike qualities. So let's take these thoughts captive. Let's look at these things and see the underlying spiritual principles in them. First one I want to look at is the Joker from Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight Batman movie. And he is a good Satan type. The Joker, we want to look at him as a type of Satan. Yes. So first of all, his origin story is murky. He's talking to one of the evil henchmen, one of the mob henchmen, and he tells him how he got the scars on his face, and he tells him one story. Then he's talking to Rachel Dawes, the sort of love interest of Batman, and says he got scars another way. So they don't know, and they don't know where he's come from. He didn't have, whenever they arrested him, he didn't have any identification, nothing indicating where he came from. Well, Satan's origin story is just as murky. Now, I've said this before, and I'm not trying to wear it out, but I'm going to keep saying this stuff till it kind of catches on and I don't hear it anymore. But yeah, most people's origin story, that there was a third of the angels and Satan up in heaven, and they rebelled against God, and a third of the angels was cast down to the earth, and it tore up the earth. That's from a work of fiction called Paradise Lost by John Milton. A self-aware book of fiction, and yet that's people's origin story for Satan. Well, but even in the Bible, even apart from people's mythology about Satan, which is basically what it is, most people's belief on where Satan came from is a myth. I know people have an aversion to that, but it's the truth. But even in the Bible, Satan's origin is kind of murky. The name Satan wasn't in the Old Testament a proper name. It's Ha-Satan. Ham is the Satan. So in Hebrew, now in Greek they do, but in Hebrew, proper names don't have definite articles. I'm not the Travis, but in Hebrew, names didn't have definite articles. And also, Satan, Ha-Satan just meant an adversary. Balaam's donkey, whenever it opposed Balaam, whenever it was an angel was about to kill him, and the donkey was trying to stop him. So actually the donkey was trying to help him, but even then he was called Hasatan. He was an adversary to Balaam. That word Satan is used there. However, during the Second Temple period, and that's when a lot of our New Testament doctrine was developed, during the Second Temple period. Mainly what I'm talking about is the time between the close of the Old Testament canon. Actually, in the Hebrew scriptures, it's Chronicles. The Christian Bible ends it with Malachi, which ends it with a curse, and don't think that there's not an agenda behind that, but I won't get on that rabbit trail. Actually, the Hebrew scriptures ends with hope, but between the time of the end of the Old Testament canon and about 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed, of course Christianity arose in between that time, and the coming of Jesus. So that's when it really was kicked up a notch, and that's when we got most of the revelation. But actually, some of this revelation had already come out when Jesus came along, and that surprises some people. But they were looking at, what's the cause of the proliferation of evil, and they begin to look at like the Satan that's in Job and in Zechariah, when it's not talking about just somebody being an adversary like Balaam's donkey. That wasn't the devil. And by New Testament time, you see a personality called Satan, and it actually became a proper name by then. But the point I'm making behind all this is his origin story is kind of murky. He's such an agent of chaos, he's even hard to nail down. Beelzebub, you see in the Gospels that they accuse Jesus of being, that he was casting out demons by Beelzebub. But actually in 2 Kings 1:2, it says Beelzebub was the god of Ekron. So Satan is kind of a composite of all these Old Testament pagan deities, and it comes together in the serpent in the garden and all these other things. And by Revelation, you see, him called the serpent and the dragon and all these other things. So all these pictures begin to form the profile of what we call New Testament Satan. And also, he's also an agent of chaos.
Criminals aren't complicated, Alfred. We just need to figure out what he's after.
With respect, Master Wayne, perhaps this is a man you don't fully understand either. Some men aren't looking for anything logical, like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want to watch the world burn.
Christians make the same mistake as Batman did in this movie. They're trying to understand, and they think that the spirit of this age can just be reasoned with. This chaos agent is through a worldview known as Marxism. And Marxism, in their own writings, say that their whole point is to tear down the family, tear down gender, tear down religion, tear down everything in the creative order that God has made. And that's why you can't reason with these people. That's why it takes the gospel. None of these things even make sense. The things that tear down the family, tear down gender, tear down religion, all these other things. You can't reason with it. You can't just say, well, here's logic, because it's not based on logic. It's all about tearing down everything in God's creative order. That's why it will take the gospel to change the spiritual complexion, but because that is what the spirit of this age wants to do. It just wants to set the world on fire and watch it burn.